Hey guys, this video is going to be the full 2025-26 snowmobiling season of me fixing up and breaking and again fixing this old Indy 400. So the beginning of this video had really horrible audio because of wind, so just doing a quick voiceover here so I can spare all of your guys' ears. So right now I think I'm just the beginning of this video is just going to be cleaning the carbs and getting the thing to fire up, so I at least had some starting point but once when the snow fell.
All right, I got our air box up, but then I remember the next thing is that these liquid-cooled ones have drains at the bottom of their cylinders. See if I can get a shot of this here. So I kind of want to see what comes out of the drain here. And of course the threads are screwed up, so it's not just going to be finger tight. Okay. Let's see. See if I can even get a shot of it here. Where the hell is it? Ah, right there. That's a good shot. So I'm not sure if there's going to be like old gas in here. Probably a lot of oil, but either way, it's especially this Indy 400 always was the one where if you did just the wrong thing, it would flood. And so I'm guessing there might be old gas in here, or maybe even water from the time I sunk it, even though I drove it like 3 miles afterwards. So I don't know, but I do vaguely remember compression testing this right after that, and it didn't seem to be hurt by it or anything, so we'll see. Oh no, that's just straight motor oil that I would have dumped in there, I think. Let's see, what does this smell like? It's a mixture of gas and of old gas and motor oil. Well, that would have probably caused issues with plug fouling and whatnot if I left it in there, so that's probably good. Yeah, definitely a mixture of old gas and motor oil. Okay, let's see what this drain has in store for us. Yeah, it should be down here. See if we can get this on here and see how tight this one is. Right on the knuckle. Whew. All right. Let's see, hopefully this one comes out a little easier. Yep. See what this one has in store for us. And pretty much the same. This disgusting mixture of old gas and motor oil. Well, I'll let those drain for a minute and throw those back in. I'm contemplating trying to flush it out with some brake clean. I don't know if that's really going to do us anything or what, but it might be worth a shot just to make sure we don't have to sit and yank on it for 10 minutes for the damn thing to fire up. So, right, this first carb doesn't look too bad, just has a little bit of sediment in the bottom. Probably just got to blow everything out and then she'll be good. Alright, again, the second carburetor does not look bad at all. I think there might have been a little bit of water in them when I took them apart, but other than that, just got to spray this one out too and we should be good to go. Alright, now the wind is picking up, unfortunately. I've got the carburetors on there, I've got the fuel lines flushed out a bit, hooked everything up, and now I'm going to use the plugs that were in there because this thing has a horrible habit of fouling plugs, so I'm going to let it foul those before I bother putting new plugs in. thing pretty much fired right to life after like one squirt of brake clean on even on the plugs that are in there. So I'm gonna call this thing good because it really seems like it is good. So naturally I need to put that airbox back on. Now the next issue that the astute of you might have noticed is, well, that pipe leaks exhaust off of my million welds that I had to do there. Now that I'm probably just gonna ignore. What I might not ignore, even though I ignored it all last season, is when I got this, originally the Y pipe was taken off. Now, I didn't know why, and I just found some nuts and gaskets that I had and threw them on there. However, that is pretty warped. Now, someday I might get around to taking that off, belt sanding that flat, putting fresh gaskets in it. However, looking at the gap there, I would probably be sitting at the belt sander for a solid hour sanding that down. So honestly, in the fact that the liquid cooled ones are different from the air cooled ones, I don't know, that might just stay like that forever because it really doesn't matter. Alright, so I just couldn't resist, and I just had to take that Indy 400 for a rip around the yard, and it's pretty much 100% back to where it needs to be in terms of power. But then I parked it over there, and I remembered one thing, and that is the fact that the front suspension, one side is a lot softer than the other. Now I do have, I do have the original front suspension off of this thing. Now either one shock is blown and the other one isn't. I know I do also see one of the radius arms on that one is bent. Now I've been calling this one the Indy Trail. Now you might be really, I don't think this ever, I think I recorded it, but I never really ended up making a video out of it. Oh, that's not right. But basically this is an 85 Indy Trail that I nose cone and hood swapped to this later Super Sport. Well, the hood's off of a Super Sport. Basically, the one guy around here that's cheap, that parts these things out, that's actually somewhat cheap. I was asking him for, I think it was either a set of gauges or a hood, or I was asking him for something, and he said, oh yeah, for like 30 bucks I've got this pretty decent hood with a windshield on it and gauges. And I think that's what it was. I was asking for gauges for this because there's something wrong with, I think I busted the speedometer on this original hood, and I didn't have the right cable, or I busted the speedometer cable, or something was up with the speedometer, which is kind of what this thing needs, is a drive shaft, because the speedometer bushing is bad, and I've got an extra drive shaft. And I'm also going to put the Fox extra 10 front shocks from that sled onto this one, because that's the one thing that's kind of always bugged me, is like they have a nice set of Fox shocks and these aren't Fox, or maybe they are and they're just not labeled, and I will be wasting my time. I have no clue, but I digress. Anyway, so this thing is an 85 Indy Trail that has an extra 10 front and rear swap with the hood from a 488 Super Sport, which is, fitting because it is a 488, same motor as a 488 Super Sport, but then that nose cone and front bumper are off of that XLT where this hood came from. So this is kind of a Frankenstein. But anyway, that's why I've been calling this the Indy Trail. But anyway, I still have the front, which one is it? The front left trailing arm and the one, because this one had one bad shock and one good shock. So I'm hoping that they're the same, and it also has the 400 also has a bent radius arm. So I do have the one side of this suspension at least, where I can hopefully put a good radius arm on that sled, or not this sled, but the Indy 400, which is behind that tree, and hopefully make that front suspension good, because I completely forgot about the fact that one side of that front suspension is stiff and the other side is really soft, which we kind of noticed the last time when I had somebody else driving it, and he said, oh yeah, this is completely uneven. So we took it off a couple of, like 6 foot, we were taking it off a jump where we were getting about 6 feet of air, and I was kind of hoping that would soften the other side and even it out, and evidently it didn't. But this one is the only other factory 8-inch, or whatever you want to call them, standard front suspension I have. So I am going to do a little bit of comparing based on, if this sled feels like the left or the right side of that sled, so I know which side I can need to replace the shock on, because either the shock is bent and it's not flexing, or either one side's blown and it's flexing too much, or the other side is bent and it's not giving at all. So, all right, so it's the next night. I've got my got the Indy 400 up on its side here. Now this is the side which I think the shock is blown, and we've got our bent arm here. So I think what I'm going to do to replace this is what I did on, I did this on the XLT, is just take this side off, spin this out, and then spin the other one in, tighten up that lock nut, and then we should be good. Now I should actually make sure that all those lock things are tight, because I remember correctly I had maybe one of these where they weren't tight and I was just kind of ignoring it. But it ain't this one, so I'm just going to ignore that even more. So anyway, I think the first things first, let's maybe get the shock out of here, and then once we get the shock out of here, then maybe it'll be easier to deal with the swing arm, not the trailing arm. I think I just said trailing arm. And then once we deal with the trailing arm, then we can put the new but older, or the other shock back in. This is the one that I have right now. This is the replacement. It's out of an 85, and this is what, an 89, 90. I don't remember. All I know is the registration is fucked up on it. But anyway, that's besides the point. That shock seems okay. Seems better. And then of course we have that lower, the thicker of the two arms. So it'd be this arm is what we need. Usually it's kind of weird that the thicker one's bent, I would think, but either way, should be a pretty simple job here. All right, so these are our new parts here. We got that lower radius arm, and then we have our new shock that I finally had to cut the bolts off for those. Never mind the fact that this new shock is slightly longer. To be honest, I didn't even really notice when driving it before that the one side was fucked up. So as long as it's better than it was before with that newer shock, or that different shock, I don't really care. So yeah, I think I thought about just not doing the radius arm, but I'm here and it's not like it's that many more steps. Let me see if I can separate that end of it and see how hard that's going to be on this side of it, this side of things. There's a possibility I may just throw the shock on and call it a day, but I'd really like to have that radius arm. The next thing is that I got to make sure that those are the same length, because if they're not, then I mean there's no point in even trying. But just the fact that that shock is actually like half an inch longer makes me think that that radius arm may not be the same length, so I need to double check that. All right, so I have found out that that radius arm that I thought was the same is actually shorter, which is just, while it is interesting to me that them both, the two sleds that these came off of, being an 85 Indy Trail and an 89 or a 90 Indy 400. I mean, they're practically the same horsepower class, definitely. Obviously, one's a liquid and one's a air cooled, but they are a very similar sled with standard suspension. It's just interesting to me that the Indy Trail has just that much more clearance, like just has literally a half an inch longer shock and shorter arm, so it would sit down a little higher. That is kind of interesting, but we're going to try and shoehorn that shock in there anyway and hope that works better for us. But that bent radius arm is just going to have to do, because I don't really care. All right, so we've got the shock in there. It didn't really go in too bad at all. I just got to tighten up the bolts, and I did also take a hammer and kind of try and hammer that trailing arm, or that radius arm, a bit straighter, and it does honestly seem like it is a little bit better, so that's good anyway. But I'm going to tighten all this shit up and see if I did anything or if I did nothing. Okay, well now it is better-ish. It's still, that side is still softer than this side. I still have no clue why, and I don't know what to do about it. My only thought is, I mean, because this shock very easily, like, it still flexes just as you'd expect, but that side is still soft, so there's a distinct possibility both of those are blown, but I mean, it is a little better now, but I still just don't honestly know what to do about all this. For now, like, my only thought is put that shock that I just took out of that side into this side and see what it does. That is my only thought on what to even try right now to fix this. And I'm going to decide pretty quickly here whether I actually want to do that, or if I want to go home and go to bed and forget about it. So I'm sure you guys figure out which I'm going to do either way.
Should I lay under you? What? Should I lay under you to jump over? No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Ah, you fucked it.
So what happened on the old Indy 400 is we were really, I was running this thing around all around the other week, and well, the chain snapped, and when the chain snapped, it kind of tore all that shit off with it. You know, the tensioner peg there, it broke the chain case, and well, I cut that to make disassembly easier, but that's besides the point. Anyway, so being that I'm cheap, you know, I go and contact the two local-ish, you know, snowmobile junkyards. The one that actually that has a massive junkyard said, "Oh, $140 for a chain case and gear set," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a bit cheaper than that." So then I checked the other guy. Other guy doesn't have any because he doesn't have as big of a stock. But anyway, I know that unfortunately all the wedges, all the Polarises that I are currently in service, they all have the old style chain case, and all my parts ones have the new style chain case. So I was thinking, well, what if you can swap the chain case? And you know, there wasn't a concrete answer online. Asking forums, and they say, yeah, the mounts are exactly the same. You just got to swap everything else with it. And that's like, well, that's perfect because I do have everything. So those are the two different chain cases I have. I think that one's going to be the one we're going to end up using right there. And yeah, so what do you need to do for this project? Because kind of the reason I'm making this video right now is to kind of hopefully document that this is possible, because, you know, people, you know, that are experienced with these know that, oh yeah, they're the same, you can swap them, but, you know, if you're just getting into this, you might not know that. All right, there are a number of differences to consider when making the swap happen. So the first thing is the drive shafts. Now, this Indy 400, I already happen to have swapped the newer style drive shaft from the parts sled into it because the speedometer key had a cable busted off into it. Now, what I didn't realize is this is the newer style speedometer. They have this bearing, or this seal bushing right here. I don't know if you'd call it a bushing, but this is right there for the extra oil seal that the newer ones have, whereas this older one doesn't have that. So you can put a newer drive shaft into an older chain case, but not vice versa. You can't put an older drive shaft in a newer chain case, and I actually destroyed the seal when I was test fitting everything to make sure I had all the parts, because I just grabbed this drive shaft out of the parts pile and didn't realize that this hex part wrecked the seal, so I had to replace the seal. So that's one thing to consider. You're going to have to get the drive shaft from the newer sleds. Now the next thing is the jack shaft. Now the jack shafts are, in theory, if you want to use the newer chain case but the older gears, I've been told that you can do that. I don't see why, I guess I don't see exactly why you can't, as long as you also use the brake rotor with it, because I do believe they look like they're similar enough dimensions to work. My only concern is, like I said, same thing with the drive shafts, is that the seal surface is totally different, because the old style chain cases, see if I can find the example here. So this is the old chain case. There's no oil seal here. The only seal are the seals on the bearings. On the newer style chain cases, you have these oil seals, these extra oil seals, which may or may not be, you know, they might or might not be necessary considering the old ones don't have them, but I guess it's basically, you know, extra security on making sure you're not going to leak oil. So anyway, point is that that seal surface might not be in play there, which may not matter, but you know, I don't know exactly. I'm not going to be doing that because I have extra jack shafts lying around. I'm not going to be using the original jack shaft because the other reason I'm doing this is I have a gear set for the newer jack shafts. I don't have the original gear set, or I do have it, it's right there, but the chain's busted, so it doesn't really matter. So if you're gonna, point is, if you're gonna do this, I would suggest, you know, getting the whole drive system. Now, the last difference to note is on the sleds themselves. This is the XLT that I got one of those jack shafts and Chaincase out of, whatever. So they have this cutout right here for the to slip the jack shaft through when you're going to disassemble and reassemble it, rather than having to remove the bearing and have the shaft slide through without the bearing. So the older ones do not. Now I have taken the cutting wheel and cut my own because it shouldn't really matter that you do this. If the newer style are strong enough to make that work, I don't see why the older ones should be any different. Now, there might be more differences I find once we go to put this back together, but this was something I just did to make my life a little bit easier. You don't need to do that, but I did. Now, the next thing I'm going to be questioning is if that brake line is or is not going to be correct, but those are all things for later. So I think I'm going to get all my parts together here and start assembling it.
All right, voiceover me correcting what past me is saying in the video. So basically what I'm explaining here is the jack shaft that came out of the XLT had a non-locking collar bearing and had a bearing where it just had had an extended like shank on it with set screws in it, whereas the other one I had, which was out of a 97 Trail, that one had the regular locking collar style bearing that most of them have. Now, I think in this video I was saying, no, is there a 2 or a 3 cylinder difference? I don't necessarily think so. I think it's just somebody put the wrong fucking bearing in it, or maybe they decided to switch bearings at some point for something. I don't think there's any correlation to what models came with them. I just am explaining I decided to use the jack shaft and by extension bearing off of the 97 Trail as opposed to the 95 XLT because the bearing was closer to the original style. And I think later I end up replacing the bearing with a new one anyway because you can buy those bearings at your local farm supply store. They're just a standard agricultural bearing. So I think that's what ends up happening here.
All right, now looking at this on the other side, after we slipped our jack shaft in, you can throw the brake caliper on here, or the brake rotor on here too. Now I'm going to be installing this by putting the rotor on and then removing the caliper. That's the way you should do it. In theory, you could just throw it on there without, throw it on there with the caliper in place. That's how I was going to do it, and then I decided to not do that because that's kind of dumb. Because what I actually didn't know until I took apart the other one is that this one, the seal here had fell out. So this actually looks like that. However, this has this seal on here, so I decided, and I didn't know that, and I would have put this in without that seal and probably leaked more. And I'm about an equal amount of concern about both of those leaking out, because if that leaks, that just sucks and it's a lot of work. If this leaks, that gets on your brake and you might not have brakes. So that's not ideal. But anyway, in theory, we should just be able to throw this in there like that. All right, so now we've got this jack shaft installed. Now, kind of what I had to do is once I got it in there, that bearing is kind of tight. So I had to put our gears on here and snug it up, use the threads on that to pull it in. Now, the reason for that might actually be the top bearing is actually out of the old original Chaincase, and I'm guessing that might be like that because that's meant to be, you can tell that the bearings, even though they're the same part number, might not actually be the same because the outer seal on those bearings, actually I could probably just show you, the outer grease seal on this bearing, which is the same as the upper one that I stole out of the original Chaincase, that's metal. So I'm guessing that these bearings might actually be made to be the entire seal and not have all this extra shit for the seal. Because as you can see on the inside, this is just a regular grease seal. Now, if you pay attention, I do believe here, this says 6205, and if you, I don't think I have another bearing as an example, but those are also 6205. You go to the, you know, wherever, if you happen to have a local place, like surprisingly my local Fleet Farm had 6205 bearings, so I got a new lower bearing, but I only got one. But yeah, that was also a 6205 bearing, but I'm guessing that might have been actually a difference. But if that bearing is obviously made to be the whole seal, I have more confidence that that upper seal is going to seal, considering we have both the bearing acting as a seal and all the other, you know, actual seal shit. If that makes any sense.
Okay, that probably doesn't make any sense because my dumbass forgot to explain this properly. So what I'm saying is that the old style chain case bearings had that metal outer grease seal, whereas the newer style bearings on the newer chain cases, and in addition to that, the bearings that I ended up buying, or the one bearing I ended up buying, they just have regular grease seals on either side rather than having the metal retainer on the one side so the grease seal doesn't pop out, because those grease seals are fairly prone to popping out. So what I'm saying is that even though all the part numbers match to be a 6205 bearing, there's probably a difference in the OEM Polaris bearings that went in those old style chain cases so that the grease seals didn't pop out and the grease everywhere, because they were the entire seal for the chain case. All right, the last thing I'm explaining here is that both the clutch side jack shaft bearings and drive shaft bearing, the upper and the lower, are the same standard agricultural bearing, and then the chain case side are both the regular, they're proprietary Polaris bearing, but they are both the same as well.
All right, so the next kind of thing I ran into is these brake switches are different. The brake switches are different because they rotated. Basically, the switch for this one looked like, the connector looked like this, and then they switched him to be like this, if that makes sense. So I was gonna be like, shit, I gotta go grab some crimp connectors, maybe go try and find the proper one out of a wiring harness, because that one with the XLT just had fucking crimp connectors on it. But then I realized, yeah, why don't you just cut the connector in half and shove it on there anyway? And that's what I did, as you can hopefully kind of see. Kind of a shitty spot, but as you can see right there, maybe see, that's gonna be the way it's done. So yeah, simplest way to do that anyway. But yeah, ideally you'd probably just cut that off, put a couple of spade crimp connectors on there and call it a day. Now I did also put some grease on this brake pad here. Now, you're supposed to use, like, I don't know, Glide or whatever type of brake caliper grease. You know, there are greases for that, but I don't have any, so regular old grease is good enough. All right, so I forget where we were in terms of the chain case swap, because due to unforeseen circumstances, that engine's coming out because the primary engine cooler kind of has a hole in it now. So I didn't realize that until, you know, I checked the coolant. It was a little bit low, so I look and there's just a little bit of a ding and a crack in that cooler. You'll see why once I get this thing up and actually it's turned over again. But right now that motor needs to come out. I hope it's going to come out. I don't know if it will, but we're gonna obviously try to get it out, because yeah, and then it's going to be fun to fit that XLT cooler in this 400, because you'll see later. They're kind of a different shape, but should be close enough to work. All right, so 20 minutes later, I got the motor out. That should be as far as you need to go to get to those lower coolant lines, which I'd love to point out are way easier to get to than on this XLT over here, because this XLT, they fucking go way back in there. I really do hope that means that I won't be pulling another one of those coolers, though. I hope that they're close enough to actually fit in the same spot, because if not, that would be absolutely tragic. All right, so right now we've got our Got everything out up top. We got the coolant hoses off. Now, as you can see, this is the issue, is I think somebody ran a studded track or something and it beat the shit out of the cooler right here. But then more importantly right there, last I checked, this was completely flat, but evidently a stick or something came in here and put a hole in right here, and there's just barely a crack in there, and this was leaking so slowly. But when I rubbed, the other day when I rubbed my finger on it and tasted it, it had that bitter ass coolant taste. Now the biggest issue I'm gonna run into is that back on these ones, they used steel rivets, whereas the XLT that I just took the cooler out of, that was aluminum rivets. So we're going to be sitting here fighting with these steel rivets for a while. I'm hoping I can just drill them out and then obviously put new rivets in, and that'll be that, but that's kind of wishful thinking, honestly. Now, the next thing to fix while we are down here, too, is if you look very closely, when I don't know if it'll be that easy to see, but when I rock this whole thing, the fucking tunnel and the bulkhead, the rivets are all loose and worn out, so I need to, like, put more bolts in here to get the bulkhead and the fucking tunnel so they're one solid piece again, because that's kind of important. All right, after a few minutes with the grinder, we've got our cooler out. So this is one that came out of the 400, and this is the one out of the XLT. Now I'm going to do some playing around here. Now we've got two options. Number one, which is kind of my favorite of the two options, is to just drill new holes in the tunnel where all these holes line up, and just do that. Option two is we cut the cooler, this flange off the cooler, drill new holes, and then rivet it back in the original spot that the tunnel is expecting. But either way, I know I can make this work because they are the same length, you know, everything else is the same. The only other thing I'm just noticing is a difference is this XLT has a much bigger inlet port than the 400 does. So we are going to make sure that we can somehow make that work. If not, I might be grabbing the old Indy 500 bulkhead I have and pulling this cooler out of that, because that's the next thing, is that's definitely bigger, which shouldn't in theory be an issue as long as you can get a damn hose over it. All right, so like I've just mentioned, we do have some glaring issues with this XLT cooler. So number one is the way this flange really doesn't work. So in order to make that work, I would have to slice it about right here and try and straighten this and make this about even, you know, flat with that line, just like this cooler is. Now, mounting isn't going to be our issue. What our main issue here is, you know, this outlet is a little bit bigger than this, but that's big enough for the hose to stretch on. And actually, I was going to use the hose from the XLT anyway, because, you know, this hose right here, because I accidentally got the other one with the Sawzall earlier when I was cutting the hose clamps. So that's not a huge issue. The big issue is, you know, these smaller ones are fairly common, what you'd find on like a heater core, so it's not unreasonable to find like shit to splice these and whatnot. These, on the other hand, this is you know, nothing uses that size of fitting, which is kind of the issue here, is that we don't really have a way to get this, like to get the heater hose, or not the heater hose, but the coolant hose to hook up to this, because like, what do? I probably have a couple chunks of this size hose laying around, but then how do I adapt that to be the same size as the Indy 400 hose? I don't know. I would have no way of making an adapter unless, like, you know, the other thing is that you're going to be, like, if I made it with like a pipe that's that big, I don't have any tubing that's that small, so that's going to end up being a fairly good restriction on that coolant and shit. So there really isn't a good answer here. I'm going to go check out the Indy 500 bulkhead, and I have the Indy 500 frame, and see if that has a closer match for a decent cooler. Now, I was looking around, and this will be our backup plan. So if I can't find if that Indy 500 chassis doesn't have a usable cooler, my plan is going to be to cut a piece of pipe out of this handlebar, because that's probably the thinnest tubing I have. That'll be about the right size to fit that heater hose over, and then take a piece of pipe, because I know I have pipe that'll fit over that like 1-inch hose, for that other sled, and I hope I have, this will only work if I have a 90 degree, but if I have a 90 degree of that 1-inch hose, then we could, in theory, weld this pipe to that pipe, and I'm pretty confident I can make a watertight weld for that. and yeah, make an adapter that way. That's the only other option I currently have. All right, now we've got the cooler off of this Indy 500, which, don't get me wrong, it's still not the same. However, it is the least wrong I've had all night. So it's, you know, I don't have to modify it to mount it. I just have to drill new holes since these are slightly further out. However, you know, this is still the wrong inlet size or outlet. That would have to be the inlet size. However, it came with this nifty piece of hose right here that has a bigger size right here that then goes down to, you know, the size that I can work with, which this hose still doesn't quite match that hose. But tomorrow at the parts store, I can actually grab a union in that size, and then I'll be golden with that. You know, that'll be a much cleaner and better way of running this rather than having to make shit and all that stuff. So that's what we're gonna do for that anyway. I think the next thing is I gotta figure out how I'm gonna rivet that cooler in, and then we've just gotta find other stuff to do until I get tired and go to bed. Unfortunately, because of that, I'm probably not gonna want to install the motor tonight, so until I can figure out our coolant hoses, unfortunately, but that's okay. All right, so we've got these 4 rivets on here already. Now these line up. Now the issue is that is, you know, we've got a little bit too much of a gap here, so I think what I'm gonna have to do is these holes don't line up perfectly either. So what I'm gonna do is drill new holes. We've got quite a bit of room here on this last little fin here, so I'm gonna probably grab like a needle nose vice grip and clamp these together, drill a hole all the way through, and then pop the rivet in. And just have to do that at, you know, have to do that at like 4 or 5 spots around here, and that should actually be a lot simpler than I imagined. So anyway, this is what we got for the cooler. It's pretty much fully installed. I added a couple extra rivets since they're, you know, aluminum instead of steel, but I think that'll be pretty much it. I did use the torch and kind of heated that seam up, so hopefully that should be bent back in. Now we're going to figure out how the hell we're going to reinforce this bulkhead to tunnel seam here. All right, I forgot where we left off, but it's the next day and we have all sorts of rivets along this whole thing. Hopefully that should be enough to keep this together for enough longer anyway.
What you guys don't see is when I was drilling through one of those rivets near the chain case, I put a little bit of a nick in the chain case, not enough to where it probably would have caused a problem, but enough to where I went ahead and replaced it with my spare chain case anyway.
All right, so fast forwarding a little bit, we got this locking collar installed, or this bearing and locking collar installed so that the drive shaft is centered. Now what we can do is we can take these bolts out that hold this bearing in and then slide the drive shaft up, and then we'll be able to slip the track in right there. All right, so I got the track dropped under there. I got the bearings on this side, or the bearing on that side all bolted in. So now I think the next thing is going to be bolt that brake caliper back on, get that bled up, so then when I go to tighten down the whole gear set, I can just hold the brake when I tighten it. For now, I've still had that factory one on there, and I think, unfortunately, you gotta fucking spin the whole thing because there's no flare nut ends on any of this shit because it's a Polaris, so why would there be? So, yeah, we're gonna have to get creative with that and then bleed it out, and then should be good to throw our gear set back together. Then at that point, should be good to put the motor skid back in and then kind of finish this thing up. All right, so for these brakes, I ended up just having to go and grab the brake line off of another sled, which is fine, but now I'm just going through trying to make sure this master's bled, then I'm going to bleed the caliper there, and then we should have brakes. All right, now that we've got brakes, I'm going to go ahead and assemble this chain drive system here. So when this is the picture I will be referencing in order to figure out how all this goes back together. Now, mostly just all of this stuff, because yeah, I didn't take this apart, or this year. I took this apart last year, many years ago, and I don't remember exactly how it goes together. So this is a huge help, and now I basically just know exactly how to put this, what set of spacers specifically to use to put all that together, and make sure it's all tight, no play, and all that good stuff, and should be good to continue on after that. All right, just like that, our gear set is installed. We're about ready to put the cover on and fill it up with oil. And I realized I'm gonna have to take that brake off again to get that oil and coolant tank back in there, but that's no big deal. Really just needed the brake to get all this shit installed, and then yeah, from there we could put our skid in. We could put those coolant and oil tanks back in. We have plenty of work to do still. So, all right. So there's just enough room to slip this oil and coolant tank past the brake line and kind of bending it in shape or whatever. And now got those in there. So pretty much the next thing I think is we got to drop the skid in, because if I'm going to be tipping this up and shit, I'd rather not have the motor in there so it's a bit lighter. But anyway, I think we got skid and motor left, and then that's pretty much it. All right, well, we've got our skid just about ready to go in. Now, I do vaguely remember doing that four bogey wheel thing last year, but I just kind of, I replaced a couple of these bogies with one from that Parts Extra 10 skid. And, you know, these bearings aren't particularly great. I probably should end up fucking buying some new actual bearings and throwing them in, but I kind of tried to see if I could sneak some oil past all the bearing seals and kind of get them all lubed up. That shock bushing was gone, so I made a new one out of electrical tape. You know, just kind of tried to do something to make this last a little longer, although this whole sled's pretty fucking hashed anyway, so I don't think it really matters too much. But you know, really, we only need like 2 of those and those 2, so yeah, the rest of them should kind of be fine. Anyway, just gotta finagle this in here. I remember this one not being so fun, and then pretty much ready to do the motor. And then I also keep forgetting I gotta redo the skis too. Fuck. All right, just like that, I got the rear suspension in. Wasn't too difficult, but you know, it's never really that fun. Now, I guess, anyway, we got to put the motor back in, but there's some wiring issues I was going to try and figure out. Mainly, the grip heaters have never really worked, and I've just been kind of toughing it out. I'm going to put a little bit of thought into this and see if I can figure out how the fuck this is supposed to work.
All right, so a bit of an explanation on the grip heaters because I never quite returned to that in this video. So basically, that whole handlebar assembly is from the XLT that I was getting parts off of, that's was sitting next to the Indy 400 in this section of the video. So the later grip heaters, they use a 2-element design to them where you have a low side element and then a high side element for the heat, whereas the older style used just a single element in the heater and then a resistor. And for whatever reason, the newer style, they're made for a higher wattage charging system, whereas the old style was made for the lower wattage charging system that the older sleds had. So I'm using the charging system just doesn't quite have as much power as the newer ones. So the grip heaters don't get quite noticeably warm. However, if I remember correctly, they do actually get warm enough to keep your hands warm and you don't really notice it. But then if you start it up and actually run the grip heaters in the shop when it's a lot warmer, they actually do get warm. So they were always functional. They just don't really, they don't get really warm because they're the wrong ones for the application. Another thing I missed out on recording is I did belt sand the Y-pipe flat. It took like 1/3 of the flange off, but it leaks a lot less now, and then I did weld up a couple of the pinholes in that exhaust pipe where I had to cut it out to remove a mouse nest a long time ago.
All right, I forgot to record the other one, but this is what I did on both of them. Basically just laid some new 3/8 rod over the old carbide where they're wearing down to almost nothing and just welding over them. And yeah, so that's all I'm going to be doing with the skis. I also tried to kind of patch up the hole that it was wearing there. I'm sure the ski will be, you know, wear through in some other spot or break or something, but this will be good for at least another couple 100 miles. Now, I forgot to pick up the camera again for quite a while, but we had to do some straightening on the bumper here since it got bent in right there, and you know, from a signpost that was allegedly hit going about 60 in the ditch. But that's besides the point. We got that, you know, straighter now, I guess. All right, cannot legitimately remember, like I've said a million times, where my last time I left off on this thing is, but here's where we are right now. So I might be heading to some 1 or 2 snowmobile events this weekend. It's Thursday. I have plans tomorrow, so I pretty much have tonight to get shit ready. So kind of last minute, but I really want to get this fucking rear bumper situation figured out, because I just took it for a short rip and you can see it kind of kicks snow all the way up, all up around in here, and I really don't like that. So I think I'm gonna make a quick and dirty tunnel extension by cutting the tunnel off of one of the few frames I have lying around. So I think we're just gonna cut the back off and rivet it on there, and yeah, that should be
should be pretty good because I really do kind of need a fucking snow flat for this thing. So we're gonna get right on that, and yeah, I should be hoping I can figure out a way to make it not look like ass.
All right, so I've kind of dismounted our seat here, slid that off to the side. Probably gonna duct tape that more later once all that shit dries off. Anyway, kind of the funny thing I always wondered is why the hell is my seat, the ass end of my seat loose? And it's because where I tightened it down actually in the aluminum here, it was starting to bust through. If that doesn't tell you how, hard a guy rides, I don't know what does. But yeah, naturally this thing is just completely, absolutely fucking beat up. I think there it's actually starting to corrode through the aluminum. And yeah, you got all your fucking, scars from shit flying up and all that stuff. Anyway, that's besides the point. I think I'm going to remove this bumper next, and then we should be able to take some measurements, figure out how far we want our tunnel to extend out, and start cutting metal out of the frames I have. We got our bumper off, and I'm looking at this here. If we look at it like this, I'm guessing we need, I don't know, maybe a good 6-7 inches to stick out. So what that means is that we go over to our parts sled here. This is the point where I want that 7 inches to be. Thinking what I'm gonna do. So then we've got this much that, we need to, that's where the two are gonna meet, but obviously we kind of need some overlap to make this, work at all. So I'm actually guessing that we maybe want to just go to maybe about where these things, where these little plastic trim pieces end. So I think I might actually just try and cut it off completely, right here. And then once we do that, we're probably going to have to trim this off. Probably remove that Extra 10 logo because that just looked fucking weird. We'll probably trim the running board off. Actually, maybe kind of look and see if there's a way we could extend that running board. I don't know. This is all going to be kind of a shit show because obviously the tunnel extensions that you could buy that I probably could have just spent $50 on and that wouldn't have been an issue. Obviously they, taper off nicely. This is going to be like, obviously it's not going to work, nearly as well because I mean, they're the same tunnel. So you're just adding on to the back. So then it's going to be like, instead of tapering, it's going to go extend down. So I'm going to have to cut that. And you guys get the point. This is going to be a lot of cutting. All right. So we got the end of our tunnel cut off of that thing over there. So like I said, this is kind of what I'm thinking here. Just kind of lay it over like this, and then we got a tunnel extension. So I'm thinking we're probably gonna, like I said, gonna have to pretty much just cut that running board off now that I look at it. And then we got some inner supports here that we got to drill the rivets out because those are going to cause clearance issues. Probably hammer that tunnel flat, and we should just be able to drill and put a bunch of fucking rivets or bolts or however I decide to do that, and then it should actually be pretty simple. It's kind of funny when you look at it like that, because that'd be way too long of a tunnel extension for this thing, but like I said, we're going to try and slip it in quite a little bit more than that. All right, so this is what I got. I drilled some holes for those frontmost bumper bolts to drill through, both parts of this tunnel here, and I think that's actually working pretty well, so I think I just need to shoot a shit ton of rivets into this, and I think we should be pretty much done. This is actually really simple. Kind of happy with the length of how it turned out. That flap shouldn't get sucked up into the track. I think this is pretty good. All right, well, our tunnel extension is pretty much done now. Guess I could have cut that and made that look a little nicer, but I don't really care. I think it looks, I think it's pretty decent as it is. Now I pretty much just got to drill new holes to mount this seat up, reattach my front seat strap, and yeah, we should be pretty much done after that. All right, so this is the finished product pretty much for the night. We kind of ran out of Gorilla Tape, so I'm gonna have to grab some more tomorrow and finish recovering that seat before I head out, if I end up heading out. Not totally sure what the plan is, but we do have this have our fucking tunnel extension made, so at least now I won't get my back full of snow and I won't be annoying the people behind me if I ever go on any big, trail ride or event or anything like that. So yeah, so I have to see where this video takes us next. Buried the old 400 a little bit, or sunk it rather, in this field puddle, but you know, we're getting her out. Well, we got her out and she's fired right up. Well, over the last few days, you know, you think the season's done, and I was just kind of trying to skip some of them water puddles in the field here, and that was kind of half ice, half water, so I never quite got a full run across it. When I finally did today, belt got wet and she sunk pretty good there, and she bogged down and died once it got in the water. I thought it sucked water in the engine, but you know, going through that whole fiasco of pulling the damn thing out, and she fired right up, and after the belt cleared of water, she runs just fine. So that's pretty nice. Now I just gotta clear my boots of water, and should be good to keep riding, I guess. All right, well, that's quite possibly the end of snowmobiling for this season, but you know, we might get some more snow, but at the very least for tonight, my back is pretty much shot, and this 3 inches of fucking sticky snow is really not fun in the ditches, and that's all we really got around here. But you know, we did a lot more water skipping in that puddle way over there. You know, turns out if you hit it at like at least 25, 30, then it doesn't splash up enough water to get the belt wet, and it actually works really well. So that's funny. I hit that probably 10, 20 times, but anyway, I think I'm gonna try and take these plugs to work and sandblast them off, so I don't have to, you know, spend another $7 on a set of BR8s. Might try and grab the spare out of one of those 2 tool kits, or try and find any old ones I got stashing away and see if they end up coming back from a good sandblasting. So yeah, this video has been kind of sporadic. It's just going to be really a season over here and there snapshot of this Indy 400 here. Oh, whoop, the phone's going dead. But anyway, that tunnel extension works really fucking well, I do have to say. My backside isn't all full of fucking snow, and earlier in the season it definitely would have been. So, all right, so it's just starting to snow for, you know, what looks to be our last snow of the season, and well, getting the old 400 hopefully good enough to last one more day. Now, I already have the other set of plugs, but I found 2 sets of plugs that I sandblasted at work that were previously fouled, so I'm hoping that that's a nice way I'll be able to save a few bucks now that I know that I can do that. Because it seems to actually have worked pretty damn well. So, anyway, the next issue that I need to kind of deal with, and I think that's really all we're going to deal with today, is it seems like the mag side plug was reading a little rich now, or reading lean rather. So it could be for a variety of reasons. The simplest way I'm going to try and remedy that is take the idle air adjustment, whatever, the air screw here, and run it in a little bit, just a hair. Now we'll see when I check the plugs again if that's ever going to you know, if that's going to correct it or not, or maybe I remembered incorrectly and it'll make it worse. But either way, next time we check it, we should be able to tell, and I hope I'll be able to get some action of me riding this thing for the last time of the season. Gotta wait for some more snow to accumulate here, and I'll be riding. Okay, so I just took it for a quick spin. Panicked a little bit because I overlooked something. I forgot that, oh hey, whenever you know, get a sled pretty waterlogged, if you get water in your speedometer cable, it'll freeze it up and break the speedometer key. Now, the issue with breaking your speedometer key is, you know, there's a very high chance that you get it stuck in the bushing in the end of the drive shaft. Well, luckily that did not happen, so I just need to find another speedometer key, which is probably going to end up being taken out of another sled at this point in time. But that being said, you know, we got really lucky. I just took the cable out here and made sure to blow any water through it, and then I put some more, you know, lube in it, and I'm going to try to put this back together and get the speedometer working on this particular sled. All right, well, I got that speedometer situation figured out here. Now, I was thinking about it. Now, the kind of the issue, an issue I do have with this sled, kind of, issue, is, well, this thing, I really like to have this thing to rev up to, 7,500 to 8 grand, that area, because I feel like that's where, the 400 makes its best power. Could be wrong on that, but also, I just love to hear the thing sing. Well, it does that pretty well below 50, but then at that point, that's where the secondary kind of shifts and goes into, high or whatever you want to call it. And, well, yeah, then that's where, and then it drops down to about 7, which is fine, but I've got this XLT secondary here that I thought, hey, I could try using that or whatever, because it's the same thing that the primary came off of, so they'd be matched. Excuse me. However, the secondary is not, it should spring back, and you can tell that the spring either popped out. Maybe that's why that XLT was even parted out right there. I do have another one from an Indy trail, but that ain't going to be any more aggressive than the Indy 400 one. So I think I'm going to pop that secondary apart, just try and see what's wrong with it, and maybe try and study it and see how I can tune that one or do something here. All right, well, anyway, I got this other secondary apart because it seemed like it was broken. I do want to figure out how they work. And basically, what I'm understanding here is, well, you have these 3 pegs, which, fell out and I had to crawl on the floor to find them. They push up on this ring. Now, it's kind of confusing because if you look at this part of the secondary, all that really affects. So what even is that doing? So if you look at this, that is going to basically affect how far they are. If I'm understanding, is that just an adjustment of how far they are, like basically how far this is spread apart, if that makes sense. That's only going to do one of 2 things. It's going to affect how far these are spread apart, or it's going to affect how far the spring is pushed out of the hole. I don't know. It's one of those 2, and I think I'm going to try and put the top of this together loosely to figure that out, because if that's the case, then basically adjusting that on that 400 isn't going to do anything other than screw up the belt, how that belt is tuned, if that makes sense. So I don't want to do that. But let's see here. Anyway, point is, that's just going to really screw up the belt deflection. I don't know. I don't know all the terms. That's just going to screw up. It's going to mean that belt, that it's not going to be matched to the primary very well. It's not going to be right for the belt, and it's not going to be right, is what I'm trying to say. English is hard sometimes, okay? So I'm going to see, so let's just loosely set this to maxed out on 5 here. Now you can see I was screwing with this before because I thought doing that would kind of screw with how I thought that'd change how, the fact that I don't think the spring was seated down in there very well, but if you look at that, then, yeah, see, now it holds that a little bit further apart. So, in reality, yeah, that's just going to adjust how much they are up together. You guys get what I'm saying. It's just an adjustment for different, basically, once it's set up for a sled, it shouldn't be changed. It's just for different widths of belts, if I'm understanding, or maybe, you're supposed to adjust it. I wouldn't think it's a thing where you'd adjust it depending on how worn a belt is, but maybe. I guess I'm not sure. I really should just look in the service manual, but it is still, interesting. So therefore, the main adjustment would be on this helix here, and this might actually be, it's weird that that's a black helix, but anyway, the adjustment's on the helix, and you have five spring tensions there, and then obviously it's just going to be how much, or just the ramps of the helix, basically. So, yeah, let's go and look at, if I'm going to put this on the 400, then I might, if I can get this to work properly, it's going to need to be set to a 4, if I'm understanding it correctly, though. I'm going to go look and see if I can find the charts for all this and the explanation and then the service manual, and we'll go from there. All right, so the way I'm understanding this, you just, in order to install this correctly, you just have to put this all together and then turn this 1/3 of a turn so that it tensions that spring 1/3 of a turn. And that's how you do it, and then your tuning is based on the hole that it's in right here and the tension of the spring that you have. So I'm going to look in here and see if there's a chart for how the Indy 400 should be set up, and then see if how that differs from how I have that clutch, and see if basically what the best setup here I could have, because I also know that if you go too much, then it's never going to shift, and then you're just going to sit there going like, 55, 60, screaming your ass off. Alright, so I'm trying to figure this out. According to this, the secondary sheave helix angle spec for, both the 400 and the XLT should be 34 degrees, which is all good and well, but then this says 36, but then it's not the same year. It's a little bit later than what this service manual goes to, so I don't fucking know. I'm just going to have to look at all this a lot closer. Alright, so the more I look at this, the more confused I get, because this XLT clearly has an aftermarket helix on it. Now this is a 4636 on it. That's what it's stamped as, which means that that's some kind of a combination helix, whereas this one I believe is this is the clutch off of the 400. This is stamped with T1, which means that it's a factory Polaris combination helix, which I don't know what that necessarily means. I think that means that this is kind of curved, as in the angle changes rather than being a consistent angle. But then that one, which is out of a 97 trail, just says 36, which I don't know if I'd want to use that, if that'd be more or less, or like I said, I am just completely fucking confused at this point as to which one would be the best one to use. So, yeah, I don't fucking know. Alright, so I decided to pop the 400's, thing off, and the spring was set to, the second most aggressive position, and it has a red spring, and this is a brown spring that's thicker but has less coils. And I try to look up the spring chart, and a brown spring, doesn't exist unless it's like an almond, if that's what I'm reading right. I don't know. Like I said, the deeper I look into this, the more confused I get. And like I said, this is some weird aftermarket helix that I may try. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lube this up, throw this back together with the spring in the most aggressive position, and throw that back together in some position, and maybe just swap the two out eventually and see how I feel. And I'm going to ignore the Indy Trail clutch because, yeah, I don't know. Anyway. Alright, so we have the 400s one put back together. I kind of just learning how to do that. So now, I don't know what to do about this one here. I think what I'm going to do is clean it up and put this helix in, like I said, just in where it's kind of centered there. And I'm kind of curious to see how this helix performs, this aftermarket one. And this, well, shit, clearly aftermarket spring. And yeah, I think I'll just end up swapping out secondaries once or twice just to kind of compare. But I think I might start with the XLT one, because clearly it's matched to an XLT clutch in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, we'll clean this up, grease this up with totally the right grease for the application, and yeah, see how she does. Alright, so I'm about ready to take it for a spin with that XLT clutch. I do have extraordinarily low hopes for how that's going to perform, just because of, I don't know, the fact that it seems like somebody didn't know what they were doing, because they didn't have the spring set in there correctly, and they're also missing one of the washers. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna take this for a spin, not like how it is, and then bring it back in and immediately swap it for the clutch that was out of here. So anyway, I'm gonna spin this around and we'll see how it works. Alright, so my first impressions are this setup is a yes, because I just went out and I decided to go and give her a wide open pull on the highway, on just a back road highway, because it's snowing and it's unplowed, and I just hit 90 on this thing, and it was this clutch actually, that secondary actually lets it go to about 8 grand the whole way up there, which is perfect because I want this thing to fucking rev. So that's going to work. My only thing is that it's a little more sluggish on the low end. Now that's going to be a carburetor issue. So I think I'm going to lean up those idle mixtures a bit. However, I'm also looking at this, and this belt is kind of sunk in here quite a ways, so I almost wonder if either I should see if I have a better fitting belt, or if I should adjust. adjust the sheaves in a little bit. I think I'm going to do one of those two things. I don't really like how that looks right now. All right, so I got a better belt, and I do think this looks better. I set it at 3 instead of 4 on this adjustment here, so I'm hoping that that kind of, you know, makes it so that it's a little bit wider of a radius, which means you should have a little more low-end power, just by just a tiny bit. And I'm hoping that just makes the belt, you know, a little bit happier and all that shit. I don't know. Maybe it needs to go the other way, but it seemed to me that it was sucking in a little too much. So we'll see how that works. And yeah, I do think that belt matches a little better. I don't know. None of these, all of this shit has been mixed and matched, and I just threw that belt on the one that was on here. Threw it on from like a 97 Indy trail, and it seemed to work just fine. But I don't know. It's also been beat up and shit, and it's starting to shred right there. So this will probably be a spare by the looks of it, but I'm not sure if it's the fact that, you know, it could just be the, you know, that this belt was absolutely beat on. I mean, it's been ran wet through, you know, water skipping and shit, so that could have wiped it out. It could also be that clutch, that secondary is set up differently than the other one, and it's wrong, and it's shredding it like that too. And it could also be that it doesn't like doing 90 mile an hour. I don't know. Could be one combination of any of those, but like I said, this is going to be a spare now. All right, so not really a whole lot of snow to play around with, but I pulled it back in here and noticed, you know, noticing when I was driving, I think after I pulled it out of that fucking, you know, that deep ass puddle, the steering alignment, the alignment of the handlebars to the skis is fucked up where it wants to pull left when it's going straight. So kind of the design flaw on these Polaris is you can't really adjust that without the engine out unless you want to adjust use the toe adjusters on each skis individually, which I think is what I'm going to try and do, just to try and, you know, hope that those aren't stuck as hell and get these skis pointed the right way. All right, I have concluded one of two things right now. Number one, I don't want to adjust it using the toe because, as you know, one would imagine that it's kind of stuck. I mean, I can get it to move, but it's very, very stiff. And number two, since this is a liquid cooled, it looks like you can, in theory, get to the nut down there, which is good enough for me. So I'm going to deal with that another day, probably next season, actually. And yeah, because I don't feel like taking the airbox off right now, because it looks like you kind of need to. So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave that for right now. All right, well, this is the state of the old Indy 400, and I guess that one, because, you know, somebody decided to go and run it into a tree, but that's besides the point. Anyway, this sled seems to have survived the season. I don't know, I probably won't even end up water skipping it again just because, I don't know. Don't see why. This ski kind of lost its carbide there, and it's starting to wear through again. I probably should just stock up on Polaris skis because the way these winters end up, you end up just running across a lot of dirt and pavement and shit, and you know, it's not like every ditch that you go on is deep and powdery, and it's really hard on skis and high packs around here, and it's kind of unfortunate. Now I think that track, if in my professional opinion, has well, I was going to say another season, but maybe half a season. That track is really beat, and I don't know if necessarily how common 133 tracks are. I wonder if I could swap it to a 136. But then at the same time, the other thing is, like, I can't remember if I showed on video before, but some of these plastic, the spring guides are worn out, and then that shock bushing is, well, one of them is just straight up electrical tape, and I don't know if that's gone yet. I know that these I know that most of these bearings are very noisy and damn near shot, so yeah, I mean, it's definitely taken a bit of a beating, but you know, who is really surprised? This thing has, what is that? That's 379 miles on the trip. I think that's, I can't remember if that's the season or if that must be since I put the chain case in, actually. So we maybe have 450 miles on the season. So that's you know, a pretty all right season. I mean, not the most I've ever had, and you know, the snow is kind of shitty, but I definitely got some use out of it. And yeah, hopefully I'll probably get better at making these videos. Check in, you know, probably have another series of videos on the old Indies next season.
I didn't notice until I was just editing this video right now that there is apparently a crack in the tunnel, which is fine. That can be welded up. That my issue is that that's kind of right over the data VIN plate, so I'm not too thrilled about having to modify that. I mean, I have an aluminum welder, I can weld that up, so it's really no big deal. But that's kind of funny. I never noticed that before. Something else that's kind of left out of this video here is how many miles this sled has. Now, I never quite explained it. It maybe got explained in a previous video, but this sled, the original speedometer has about 1,000 more miles on it than the replacement one I put in. Well, I don't know how many it had beyond that because it was at 6,000 miles when I replaced that speedometer, and there was no speedometer key in the speedometer drive when I got it because I think the bearing must have went out and it took out the speedometer key, and that got stuck in the end of the drive shaft, and then somebody put a new fresh good bearing in it and drove it for God knows how many miles without a speedometer. So I don't know how many miles are on it currently, but it's at least 6,500 on an Indy 400 on its original motor. So she's a pretty high mileage beat up sled. All right, so I've probably said this 5 times in the course of editing it out, and I can't remember how many times it got left in, but this is officially the end of the video, which I kept on saying because it snowed like 3 times, like the snow melted and then it snowed again, and it just did that like 3 times. So I thought it was going to be the last snow of the season, like 3 separate times. But I'm glad I got a bunch more riding. But this is officially the end of this video. Please tune in next time if you enjoyed. Like, subscribe, whatever the hell people say these days. And thanks. Bye.